Jeremy,
Hello, thank you.
nice to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
We've got a blended Scotch ambassador here with the Edrington Group. Jeremy, welcome to the Brand Ambassador series at brandlibrary.tv. We're talking about something a bit different today, right?
Well, we're talking about blended Scotch whiskies, so they might be a little bit different from some of the other whiskeys you've featured so far, but they're definitely different because they appeal to so many people.
But I see some single malts also.
Well, Macallan and Highland Park are the featured ingredients in all of these whiskeys. And they definitely come out in the famous Grouse. Black Grouse, a little bit different, something new from the Edrington Group, and Cutty Sark, the original easy drinking whiskey. It's been around since 1923. Famous Grouse is the best-selling whiskey in Scotland, and it has been for 31 years. When you go to Scotland, every bar that you go to has a giant bottle of it upside down with a spout.
On the optic?
Yes. And they drink it with ginger ale. They drink it on the rocks. I believe it's an American phenomenon to think that there's only one way to drink your whiskey. We like to say that you should drink your whiskey any way you like it. On the rocks, straight up, a few drops of water. In this case, when you're dealing with a great blend, don't be afraid to add ginger ale. Don't be afraid to add a little bit of lime. And this whiskey has been using Macallan and Highland Park in its blend for over 100 years. It really started out with a guy named Matthew Gloag. Matthew Gloag owned a shop in Perth, Scotland. It was famous for its grouse hunting. These folks were coming up hunting grouse in Perth. But year after year, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, single malts were more of a vintage product. So really, the invention of blending really started because Mr. Macallan's whiskey, year after year, month after month, might be different. And so Matthew Gloag and the other great blenders needed to create a consistent product. So when these hunters were coming up to Perth, they say, "Hey, Mr. Gloag, how's the Macallan this year?" And you say, "Oh, it's great, but it's a little bit different than last year." So maybe this one is the same every time. So year after year, these hunters are coming up and they know that Gloag's is going to be the best. So it became the Grouse, and then a few years afterwards became the famous Grouse. And as I said, it's the best-selling whiskey in Scotland for over 30 years. Blend of Macallan and Highland Park. Should we taste it?
I think we should.
Oh, all right.
I think we should. How would you characterize this in comparison to other blends? Where does it stand? Is it smoky? Is it heavy? A lot of vanilla? Is it?
Well, let's talk about it. You're welcome. Famous Grouse is definitely a little bit more on that sherry fall fruit side. Because we take Macallan, Highland Park, mix it together with the neutral grain spirit, and then we finish for another 6 months to a year in the same sherry barrels as Macallan. And that's really what separates all of our blends from other blends. A lot of blends don't finish or marry at all. So we're actually...
There's no sherry cask usually on most blends.
Especially Spanish sherry. And along with that, the Edrington Group, which owns these whiskeys and this fine rum, spends more money on oak barrels than every Scotch whiskey company in Scotland combined. Our barrels will run you around $1,100 to $1,200 a barrel. And we do that because we believe 80% of the flavor in any brown spirit comes from oak. If you have the best oak, you have the best spirit.
What grain whiskey are you using? Are you distilling your own grain whiskey? Are you sourcing grain whiskey here and there on top of the single malts that get in the mix?
It's a neutral grain spirit, and it does vary. It does vary. I mean, here what we're really dealing with is that Macallan sherry influence, which I get really intensely on the finish. Starts off with those fall fruits that you're talking about, the spice, cinnamon, and then on the back, you really get this great puff of sherry, which reminds me a lot of the Macallan 12.
You see, people say, always have it on the rocks. It's just very nice as it is.
It depends on the mood I'm in. Luckily, I'm in this business, so I have access to them pretty frequently, as do you. But sometimes I want them on the rocks, sometimes I want them straight up, sometimes I want them in a cocktail. This whiskey especially, and the Black Grouse, and now even more so Cutty Sark, we're working really hard with great mixologists to help the mixologists have another palette of flavor to play with. The world got obsessed with something called vodka at some point. And the reason why they got obsessed with it was because anything you add to it is what it tastes like. So what we're saying to these great mixologists is, here's some new flavors, here's some more interesting flavors, and the speakeasy cocktail style that's really taken off in New York has gravitated heavily to our blends and cocktails. So we should definitely go out and have one sometime. But this one, as it is perfect.
Yeah. But what kind of mood is that then for you?
Well, we woke up this morning and it's the coldest it's been in New York for a long time. So that's the kind of mood I'm in.
We both need it, and it's too cold outside to add ice. It's in the morning, this way.
I've been waiting for it. Finally, it's here. Should we move on to the Black Grouse?
Well, what about that Black Grouse?
Black Grouse is fairly new to the Famous Grouse family. And simply put, it's a smoky version of the Famous Grouse. So, Famous Grouse is a blend of Macallan and Highland Park, and the Black Grouse is a blend of Macallan, Highland Park, with smoky Islay whiskeys added to the blend. Right. When I talked to our master blender about it, a gentleman by the name of Gordon Motion, shout out to you, Gordon, I asked him what the Islay whiskeys were, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll never know." So there are a lot of...
You know not to ask anymore. Yeah. Just try to guess.
And we definitely have a lot of folks out there trying to figure out which one it is, and or ones.
It's very difficult. Very difficult, because it could be... You could recognize a style of a distillery that you like, and yet it's not that one, just because it was not aged for the same period of time as the one you think you know and that you're familiar with. Or maybe it was a different batch. Maybe there was a tweak on the distillation. Very, very difficult to know.
And the art of blending is extremely complex. They have yet to actually invent a machine that can do it as well as a human being. So the folks that are in charge of putting these percentages together to create, this consistent product, it's different every day. They work in a lab.
So this is the Black Grouse.
Black Grouse, smoky version of the Famous Grouse.
Yeah, not extremely smoky.
Very well balanced. Hints of fruity, sweet smoke.
Really English fruit cake.
Yes.
Did I say English?
You can say English or Scottish. I won't take it personally. Now, color, again, we're going more onto that sherry, Spanish sherry side.
Dark. Yeah.
Very dark. Yeah. And what impressed me most about the Black Grouse when I first had it was Gordon Motion's ability to keep the integrity of the Famous Grouse while adding another layer to it. So I actually feel as though it tastes a lot like the Famous Grouse.
It does, without that sharp citrusy nose. It seems like there's a bit more aging to it, or it's just more complex. There are more single malts entering the blend, or...
Well, aging, pretty much the same on all of our whiskeys. We're going to marry again for another 6 months to a year in the same sherry casks as Macallan. But with this one, I think that layer of smoke, those Islay whiskeys, but it doesn't taste like a completely different whiskey. It tastes like the Famous Grouse now with an added layer of smoke. But it's a round smoke. It's not an astringent smoke. It's a fruity smoke. It's not a laser-like smoke. Cheers. This puff of smoke on the back.
It's subtle. It adds to the complexity of it, for sure.
And we have a lot of drinkers that are afraid of smoky whiskeys because they jump to it too quickly.
That's a great introduction.
Great introduction.
Great introduction. If you go straight to Lafroig or Lagavulin, even though they're wonderful,
Yes.
if it's your first,
Ugh.
it could be love, but it could be hate.
Yes. Yes. And hopefully you'll keep an open mind and come back to it someday. But we're doing things with this ranging from, first of all, I think it drinks like a single malt. It has such distinctive character. And we're also the official sponsor of the Brooklyn rugby team. We are the only official sponsor of a rugby team in the U.S., or the only Scotch whiskey. And they're called the Brooklyn Black Grouses. And they're in the semifinals right now, so we're rooting for them. And that really came because those guys have a lot of heart. And again, I think they've got a lot of character. So I thought it was a perfect match.
Carry that.
All of a sudden, we can get them in the United States. And so America fell in love with great single malts. But we're coming back to great blends. Great blends are really the backbone of our culture, especially Cutty Sark, because it was actually made for America. And it's a light, bright, easy drinking whiskey.
It smells wonderful. If I say honey, if I say orange peel, if I say these things,
Yes.
am I just a nutcase?
No, you're brilliant. But a lot of it comes from the American oak influence.
It's lovely. I don't remember that being that good, but I mean, you know, that was 20 years ago.
Well, Cutty Sark, everyone had it once, they moved on, and when they come back to it, it conjures up great memories. And we're hoping to create new memories with it. We've only had it for a brief period of time, and it's all I've been drinking. And it's really because the color, obviously, that light golden pale, but then the nose is fresh,
Yeah, it's
cut
really
grass. Then when you drink it, the palate, again, our master blender said orange fudge. It doesn't have that ashy quality. It's bright, citrus, with this finish of orange fudge. And once I found that orange fudge, it's never left. And again, very, very drinkable.
Extremely drinkable. Extremely drinkable.
I just finished mine. I guess it's very drinkable.
Well, I guess you carried that stingy Scottish manner of pouring just a little bit.
Should I pour more?